quick question. How many times this week did your automated tests fail because of a broken locator? Once, twice, every day? Either way, if the answer is more than 0, then you certainly do need to watch this video till the very end. Hello everyone, I'm Casper. Welcome to Testeroni, where I'll help you become test automation engineers one slice at a time. And today we are going to talk a little bit about locators, because locators are the very foundation of automated testing. You can't click anything without one, you can't read text without one, you basically cannot do anything without one. And yet they are also one of the things that seems to break the most often, and something that many people, regardless of the level of expertise, do have troubles with. And so today we are going to do a deep dive, and I'm gonna tell you some pro tips to prevent this from happening in the future. So let's jump to our blackboard and imagine a locator looking something like this. So let's neatly divide our blackboard into two parts. It'll come in handy in a second. And let's imagine a locator looking something like this. So looks easy enough, right? So we are looking within this whole document. We are looking for the div tag. We take one that contains a class called login form. Inside of that, we take the child div that is also has a class, this time of form group, and we take the second one that fits this bill, and then inside of that we look for the input tag. So this is a typical hierarchy of elements inside a DOM hierarchy. So this is something that I call the structural locator. It is because it is heavily reliant on the structure of the elements. So you are basically giving it GPS coordinates towards the point that you are trying to point to. So basically you are telling it to go to that building and go to the 3rd floor, go to the apartment on the left and knock 3 times. That's basically what you are doing. And you may think, well, yeah, duh. So it seems like everything should be well, right? Because I'm being so precise. And yes, you are being precise. The problem is you are being too precise. Because while it is precise, it's also fragile as hell, and let's try to unpack why that is. Because let's imagine for a moment that, for example, the front-end dev adds a wrapper div. So your front-end dev just gets a little ticket saying that we need to do something about the spacing for the mobile version, for example. And so they provide an additional div inside of the hierarchy because they need it for some kind of a flexbox magic that they are going basically to unfold on this element. And it's all fine and dandy and the functionality looks fine, but suddenly your test starts to fail because your locator is suddenly looking for a div that resides somewhere around here. So the whole ordeal that you have so meticulously created is basically looking for the thing that does not exist because it's looking at a different level. You were so reliant on the structure that you basically became a prisoner of it because you are looking for something that's one level deeper than it used to be. And that's why even though this thing used to work, it's not going to work anymore. And that's because precisely here something else was injected that you did not and you could not anticipate. So the application works, you did not change anything inside the tests, and yet the tests started to fail. So let's imagine a different scenario. Let's say that the form order changes. So now let's imagine that the product owner says, let's move this field above the other ones. For example, let's have the company name above the password or between the email and the password or something like that for UX reasons, or because they were ordered to do it like that, or because there's a multitude of reasons why that may be. But either way, they decided to change the order of the forms. And so now, once again, you were screwed because you were relying heavily on the div with the form group class to be the second one inside of this hierarchy. So the moment it stops being a second element, it all goes to hell. So your locator was basically hard-coded to look for the second element. This second element is nowhere to be found right now, or sometimes even worse, because this may be harder to debug, or it points to something completely different. Either way, it's not the thing that you thought it would be. And so, since the element you were looking for is now, for example, the first one instead of the second one, and you are hard coding the second element to be the one that's being pointed at, once again, the app is working. You did not change anything inside of the testing code, and yet the tests start to fail again. All right, let's do another one. What happens if the CSS class gets renamed? So this time, let's imagine that the front-end developer is doing some kind of a refactor of this div element, for example, because they want this div to not only work for the login, but also to contain the fields for the registration, for example. And so because of that, they decided that this login form class is not going to be called login form anymore. This time it's going to be called authentication form, for example. And suddenly, once again, we have a problem, because this change makes total sense from their perspective, but your test is dead. And the kicker is that none of these changes actually broke the application. None of these changes were actually against the rules or against the decisions of the stakeholders or the decision makers. None of them. But at the same time, your tests started failing. The app works perfectly, but your locators broke. And that's because you are not actually, in this scenario, using this kind of a weird locator. You are not actually testing what you think you are testing. You're not testing the app anymore. You are actually testing whether the HTML structure stayed the same. Hence the name I decided to use for that, the structural. Because you are testing the structure, you are relying on it so much that you forget that you are testing the application along the way. And that's not quality assurance. That's basically, I don't even know what that is. But there is a light at the end of that tunnel. So let's imagine a different type of locator, or something like, so this is basically what's called an attribute locator. Or in this case, just an ID locator, because as you see here, we have the XPath, here we have the CSS locator, and here we have the XPath again. So these are just 3 examples of things that come to mind when we think about the thing that we might be pointing at using the structural locator on the left. So these, of course, are not identical, because here we are using a different attribute than on the other one, but these are just 3 examples to get you familiar with what I'm talking about, instead of just throwing one example and hoping for the best. So I hope it's helpful. But either way, all 3 of these examples, I think, outline one main thing. It's that it's independent of the HTML structure, because now the tables have turned and the developer can actually wrap this field that we are looking for inside another div, or 5 divs, or 10 other divs. They can move it to a completely different area of the page, and yet we are still able to find it, because as long as the data test ID stays password input, or as long as the ID stays password, or as long as the same thing, ID stays password, but for the XPath, either way, regardless of whether they decided to change the place that it resides in, or they decided to do an overhaul of the design altogether, either way, we are still pointing to the same element. They can restructure the entire form, and regardless of that, your locator still finds the spot. You're no longer tied to where it actually is. You are tied to what it is. And this is the important part, because that's what you should be aiming for. You should be aiming for a specific thing, not for a specific place. Another advantage of such approach is that it communicates a clear intent and purpose. So when I see data test ID equals password input, or when I see ID that is password, I immediately know what we are pointing at. I immediately know what that locator is trying to find and address. And when I see a spaghetti like this, I have no fucking idea what's going on. I basically need to either run the test to see what it actually does, or I need to Control Shift F and look through the whole framework code to see where it is actually being used and in what context, or use some other ways that you have of handling code inside of the editor to actually see the places that it was used in. But in this case, we don't have that problem. I know it's the password input, and your job is done here. So 6 months from now, you'll be thankful to yourself from the past that you decided to go the route on the right side and not the one on the left side. And so this also gets us to the pro number 3, which is that it only breaks when deliberately changed. So that XPath from earlier, it breaks whenever someone touches the HTML code for any reason whatsoever. And this bad boy, it only breaks when someone deliberately decides to change the ID or to change the data test ID of a given element. And if they're doing that, they probably have a reason for it, and probably it would be good for your test to actually catch that reason. Also, they will probably, in an ideal situation, of course, tell you, or you will see that in the PR, or there was some actual change in the designs. Either way, it is something that you should know about, and the failing test will actually point you towards that. So it's a conscious change, not a byproduct, not something that by mistake renders your tests unusable. It's something that actually alarms you that something have changed, and whether for good or bad reasons, this will be something for you to decide later on. But for the time being, it's something that you should be alerted about. So this is a difference between a locator that works and one that is stable for now. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Yeah, Casper, but my developers don't add any unique attributes that will help me identify a given element with such precision. They don't add any data test IDs, or they leave the IDs blank, or there may be a lot of things that they are doing wrong. And to that, I have just one thing to say to you. Tell them about your problem and actually ask them to address it. Walk over to the desk or shoot them a quick Slack or Teams message, or mention it in the daily stand-up. Just say, hey, would you be able to add data test ID attributes or whatever you agree upon? But data test ID is a good standard to go with. So, hey, would you be able to just add some data test ID attributes to our new login functionality, to the whole login form? Because, this would make the automation more stable, and it would actually make the whole automation suite more reliable for all of us, for the benefit of all of us, because many testers tend to think that it only benefits the QA, but that's not the truth. The truth is it benefits the entire team and the entire organization also by extension. And you know what? Most developers will actually say yes, because it takes them 30 seconds to do that. Of course, it depends on the technology that they are using and stuff like that, but in most of the situations, it's as easy as just adding a data test ID equals whatever you agree upon, and that's it. So that's basically it. Add data test ID to the login form, to, I don't know, a label or a button. That's it. It will take them 30 seconds. They spend more time pondering where to go for lunch. And if they say no, document the problem. Tell your manager how much time you actually spend and waste, how much of the company's time you are wasting by going through the locators every sprint because they keep breaking again and again and again. Show your team or your manager or your product owner all the flaky tests, or the problems that arise because of the absence of those IDs. Hell, show them this video if you need to, because stable test automation is everyone's responsibility. If the developers aren't making the app testable, or worst case scenario, are working actively to prevent it from being properly testable, that's a problem. That's a real one, and it needs to be escalated. But honestly, in my experience, the vast majority of the developers are actually really cool about that. It's not that they did not include it for some reason. They did not include it because it wasn't the problem. They just didn't think about that and didn't think about the repercussions of that. But once you actually explain why you need it, they actually will almost always be really cool about that and will understand that it's a shared responsibility that also benefits everyone. So make it a shared common problem and you'll actually be surprised. All right, so what do you actually do with this problem? So step 1, open up your framework. Step 2, find your most flaky test, and you know fully well which one that is. It's the thing, it's the one that makes you go, oh hell no, not again, when you just so much as think of it. So open that bad boy, and step 3, look at the locators that are tied to that test file. So are they structural? Are they anything like the ones on the left-hand side on the blackboard? So are they all slashes and square brackets and weird numbers, indices inside these square brackets, and the whole structural dragons that grow longer and longer with every variable and every locator? Are they anything like that? So yeah, those need to go, and this will be your step number 4. Just replace them. Try IDs first. Like, whether you use the CSS locators or the XPath, like I showed here and here, but either way, try the IDs first. If there are no IDs that would allow you to uniquely identify those elements, try data test IDs or the equivalent within your organization or project. And if there are no data test IDs, talk to your developers, talk to your team about that. But regardless of all of this, there's one pro tip for you. Don't go around trying to fix everything all at once. You'll burn out immediately, really. That's overwhelming. You'll quit. You will actually cancel this whole ordeal of refactoring your tests. Select one test, one problematic test, do it for that test, and see how stable it becomes. See it both for yourself to see how much that helps, and also see it so that you can actually present the benefit to the team. This will be your proof of concept that you can actually show on the reports to your team to show the value of how so little work on the end of the developers can actually provide so much benefit on the end of everyone, basically. And doing it like that will also motivate you in actually going through them one by one. So then just go ahead and fix the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Slow and steady, or should I say slow and stable. And look, I also want to be real with you for a second. Bad locators aren't just annoying, aren't just, oh well, I'll fix it later. They actually actively undermine your automation efforts as a whole. You can say that they sabotage the whole quality assurance process. And here is why. And this story will hit really close to home for many of you. So a test fails. So you spent an hour scratching your head and playing detective and debugging this whole thing. And so you keep debugging, and it turns out that actually it was just a locator that broke because someone added a div and did not inform the rest of the team. So, you hang your head down and you are like, okay, at least it's fixed. But the problem is it comes around the next sprint, or the same sprint a couple of days later. And so it goes like this, and it keeps happening enough, like a couple of months, that at some point you are bound to stop trusting your own tests. And then the team stops trusting your tests. And then the whole automation effort that you and the ones that came before you put inside that framework and then inside that whole process, it goes straight out the window. You start going, oh, the automation failed. Yeah, it always does. I know, I will just test it manually. It just randomly happens that it breaks. So yeah, no biggie. I'll just test it manually. I'll verify it. And the problem is that this is the precise moment at which your automation becomes useless. Not because automation is bad, not because the framework you used was wrong, not because the infrastructure is reliable. It's because the locators, the foundation upon which all the other blocks are built so meticulously through the time, it was never solid to begin with. But the good news is that it's fixable. It's totally fixable. Like, I can bet that you are one discussion away from having 80% of your problems that stem from this actually fixed. You're one discussion with your team from actually having this all fixed and sorted out for eternity, because then the good practices actually become second nature to everyone within the team, and you won't need to remind your developers every time they are shipping a new feature that they should add the test IDs. After some time, it just runs in their blood just as much as it runs in yours. So yes, you're one conversation away from sorting out 80% of your locator problems. Like one conversation, and that's it. All right, so here's a small homework or workshop for you, if you will. Open up your testing framework right now. Go to one of the more painful tests that you have, one that we discussed a moment before. You know which one that is. You know it fully well. So open up that bad boy and actually count how many structural locators you have that are tied to that test. And then drop this number in the comments. I'm really curious to see how it looks on your end, because no shame in it. I won't judge. Everyone writes bad locators. I've written some terrible locators throughout my career, so don't worry about that. We're all here to just, have fun and learn. So just drop that number down in the comments, because the problem and the overarching question is not, do you have bad locators? It's actually, are you going to do anything to fix them? So if this was helpful, please hit this like and subscribe button. If you want more practical, blunt test automation knowledge, please remember to subscribe and visit the channel often for new videos. And I hope to see you in the next one. But until then, please remember to keep on rocking.